I will be speaking to us on slave trade and slavery remembered, a study of the Slave History Museum in Calabar. I don't know how many of us here know where the Slave History Museum in Calabar is situated. We don't know. It's not far from here, just at the Marina Resort. That is where we have the Slave History Museum. Like every scholar, ours is to be inquisitive, to ask questions, to assess, to appraise whatever we see. That is the culture of a scholar. And that was why when I look at what has been done there, I began to question it. And it is that questioning that has resulted into this paper, which I want to discuss in the next 15 minutes. But for us to understand that museum, we have to go back a little, because the museum is a representation of history. It is aspect of our history that has been replicated there, which is slave trade and slavery. So look at Calabar briefly in the era of the slave trade. Calabar was an active participant in slave trade. There was indigenous slave trade and slavery. And when the Atlantic traffic started, because of its position by the coast, nearness to the port, Calabar played a very prominent and fundamental role in that commerce. And it was the slave trade that catapulted it to a very prominent position, which Calabar enjoys both nationally and internationally. Around the world, you can hardly go to anywhere and mention Calabar. People will tell you they don't know where it is. That fame was as a result of slave trade and slavery. On it again, Calabar catapulted all her neighbors, both those on the coast, those in the interior. They were not known because everybody who was passing through the Calabar port went under Calabar. So we have the Efik, we have the Bibios, we have the Ijagam, we have the Igbos, we have people of Cameroon origin, and the Upper Cross River people. Those ones are not very known because they were all going under Calabar. Slaves were known by the ports of their departure from Africa. And that is what David Northrop has done in his study on Igbo and mixed Igbo, to say these names, we don't know the identity. They were actually from beyond here. So it was just a point of departure. As a point of departure, Calabar benefited so much from the slave trade. The common thing we say in scholarship is that African lost. It was the Europeans, it was the Americans that gained from slave trade and slavery. But it is time we begin to typologize even African societies and know that there were some African societies that gained, no matter how marginal, from slave trade and slavery. What did I say it again? The vastness of Efik commercial empire had covered so many kilometers. But we know that the Efiks of Old Calabar did not enslave their own children, their own relations. Those that were enslaved were just those that were outside the Efik charter. So they enslaved others. If you read literature on slave trade and slavery, you see letters that originated from Calabar to their partners in Britain, in Liverpool, in Bristol, in England, complaining that the wrong person had been enslaved. And we find cases where these people were returned because the Europeans still had come to respect the Efik laws as regarding slave trade and slavery. So it was a big problem. Then another thing that caused so much problem between them was the movement for abolition. We know Africans had become used to slave trade and slavery, and it was a much more easier economic activity. So the movement for abolition originated from the Western world, not from Africa. So the Africans were resisting it. So why must you stop it? It's a good business. Let us continue. What happens to these people if you stop the trade? So we know of people like Ekboyong Eyamba, who had vowed to kill any European that was coming to Calabar from the abolitionists. Because they want to stop, they want to put sand into his garden. So the only thing he can receive you was that you were not from the abolitionists. So Efik merchants, the Tubons, the Eyamba, the Bonko became very prominent because of slave trade and slavery. That is a summary of what happened in the long years of slave trade and slavery here. Now, it is part of that memory that the Cross River State government tried to preserve with the creation of the Slave History Museum. Tell us so that we don't forget that important episode in our history. Like I said in my paper, it was in 2001 in this same venue that Professor Oya gave a lecture where he called for the establishment of the museum. And in 2007, the museum was completed and commissioned. And as some of us will know too, 2007 was the 200 years after the abolition of slave trade. So the state government was like commemorating this important event. So they established that museum. At present, the museum is made up of 14 sections. I won't tell us anything new here because everybody who has gone there will know what I'm talking about. The museum is made up of 14 sections. Now, before we look at the 14 sections, we can equally look at the walls, the building itself. Once you get in, you notice that the building is made up of human beings who have been chained together. Some chained neck to neck, neck to leg, leg to leg, like that. They have been chained together. What does that tell us? That people were put in bondage. And what we are going to see inside the museum is this reality. The reality of enslaving people, denying them of their freedom, and taking them across the Atlantic. When you get inside, the first section is a hall with plaques on the wall. And the things that are written there are mere summary of what most of us know about slavery and slavery. Telling us who did what, why the slave originated, how slaves were processed, taken. They just summarize those things into those plaques and are put there. Section 2 is a cinema hall where viewers are shown a traditional African society where people love themselves, care for themselves. And quickly we see a different and strange scene where people were running after themselves to catch people to sell, were put in chains and taken across the ocean. I think that section ends where the ship sails away with people where we don't even know where they are taken to. Section 3 is made up of 3 important things. One is boats filled with slaves. Number 2 is wooden barrels, and number 3 are wooden boxes. All these have their historical significance. Section 4 is the pictorial dramatization of slaves who were thrown out of the ship for various reasons. In this section 2, we have adverts that were placed for the sale of slaves. And the third important thing there was the display of manifest. Manifest is a paper where the names of slaves were written. That will have been of extreme importance to us because we will really know the names of those. And that is one way of pursuing this business, to know the number, to know the people, their origin. Name can tell us so many things about the people. But unfortunately, those manifests are not readable. I have spent several times looking at them, and you cannot identify any name because of poor preservation. So it is of little significance to the historian. Then section 5 is made up of items that were exchanged for slaves. We know scholars argue that without those items, the slave trade would not have begun. Because when the first set of Europeans came, they did not just enter into villages and begin to run after people to catch, to be taken abroad. It was because those goods were accepted by the local people and we gave them in exchange for slaves. Section 6 is a place where they auction slaves. That is like sell. You bring out a slave, people begin to auction, and at the end, the highest bidder takes the person. Section 7 is a branding room to brand them. After you have acquired your own number of slaves, you put them a mark, because when they will be put in the ship, so that there will be no confusion of who owns or who has this. And we see several slaves crying, wailing in vain to avoid blinding. Section 8 is a representation of slaves in the Americas. and the occupations in which they were employed. In a very small room, we find several persons who were involved in various works in American plantations and mines. Section 9 recreated the survival of Calabar cultures in the Americas. See, the first two speakers today were talking about Ekpe, the Ekpe society. And the most prominent in that section is the Ekpe. There's a picture of the Ekpe there. And those of us who are familiar with the literature know that Ekpe, all what Dr. Miller was talking about, he went to the Americas, went to Cuba, other areas of the Americas as a result of slave trade and slavery. So that is what Section 9 is doing. Section 10 is on resistance to slavery. No human being will willingly submit himself to be enslaved. So all those slaves were resisting enslavement. And Section 11 shows us punishments that were meted out to slaves who revolted. Several of them were lashed, and they were dogs. You find dogs in that section. They were used to run after those slaves who tried to run away. Section 12 and 13 deals with almost the same thing, and that is the Abolitionist Movement. When slavery and slave trade had come to an end, and it was that we must not continue on this trade any longer. So we have pictures of great abolitionists. There we have the picture of William Wilberforce, Reverend Sharp, Thomas Prickson, John Wesley, and Orlando Equino. In this section also we have a picture of John Newton, the composer of Amazing Grace, and Abraham Lincoln. So these were abolitionists, they were reformers, they were writers who used the power of their tongue, of their pen, to criticize and condemn slavery, which was abolished by the British Parliament in 1807. The last section is Section 14. Section 14 has books and documentaries on slavery and slavery. So that is just for people who have gone through the museum to buy, so that they can read, they can watch, and continue the story that have been reproduced in that small structure. In the next 5 minutes, I will now do an appraisal of that museum. Now, like I said, what the scholars does is to question anything he sees. People see it as tradition. People come from all over the world, and people praise it. That this museum is great effort, great wisdom. The man who did it tried so much. But is it really a true reflection of what's happened? To what extent is that museum useful to us in the understanding of slave trade and slavery in this region of Nigeria? One, I said, it is important because it keeps memory alive. What the Europeans have written about slave trade and slavery, the contentions in academic circles, people meet, conferences all over the world. I know how many conferences I have gone abroad because of slave trade and slavery. People talk about those things. But people in Calabar are hardly aware that people are busy discussing what happened to them several years ago. So that museum is important because people see it. For some people, it creates more impression in them than a textbook. People travel from everywhere to come and see the Calabar Slave History Museum. That was why I took up by asking us if we know where it is situated, because it will be very strange if there is anybody in Calabar that does not know where it is. Where people have come from abroad, from everywhere, because there is a slave history museum in Calabar. So it is bringing interaction among people in public sector and the academics. And I'm saying that without it, there will be nothing for us to criticize. So it's very good. So that it is there. That's brought about the thinking process. In spite of those advantages, the museum lacks so much as an area of memory. And my feeling is that experts were not consulted. Constructing a slave history museum or anything of historical value is not just what maybe politicians, communities, for one thing or the other, just gotta put it together. No. We have to really make sure that it is very close. We cannot actually recover what happened, but let it be the best approximation. And I'm saying that the museum is very far from what really happened in this region of Nigeria. And I feel expert. We're not. Because I have seen museums in other countries, and I know that they work hand in hand with prominent historians who are studying slavery and slavery in those countries. But in our case, it was not so. The Slave History Museum in Senegal, in Gore, is purely managed by the History Department, everything about it. The castle in Ghana, both the Mina and Cape Coast, the Ghana Historical Society are playing very important roles in it. It is like that everywhere. But I don't know of any historian of the crossover region that was consulted when that museum was made. The second point is that the museum shows over-ambitiousness on the part of those who created it. We're so ambitious, including the whole traffic, go from Africa across the ocean, the Middle Passage, the Americas, up to Europe, back to Africa. It will be difficult for you to capture important things because you are just highlighting that they took people from Africa. Museums are not made that way. The museums I have gone to in Africa, they concern themselves with the African side of the Atlantic. So let us talk what we know. And when we go to Europe, we will see what happened in Europe. In that case, it creates room for local conditions. And by so doing, the role of the ethnic middlemen is excluded. We cannot talk of slavery and slavery without the role that the local merchants, the middlemen, played. And if you go through the Calabar History Museum, it has nothing on any merchant. It has nothing on any black person. The idea we have is that it was white men that came, they recruited our people, they took them away, they were bad, and that we suffered under it. Therefore, we should be given reparation. Let them give us money. I'm saying that that is not how slave history museums are constructed, because it is supposed to keep memory alive, tell us a story, and we must be willing to tell the complete story, no matter how bitter it is. It's not a situation where we just explain away our disadvantages at others. I say, fine. There is nothing that will have prevented us from putting the plague of a man like Ekoyon Iyamba, who was willing to kill abolitionists, and King Eyo Honesty, who even after the missionary have come several years, by 1850, was still writing a letter to his former colleagues in Britain that he has slaves, he has gathered them, and they should come and carry. And when the merchant in Britain said, no, this business has been banned, he said, who bans it? When the law of Ekpe has not forbidden slavery and slavery, who again? Or are you women that somebody should tell you what to do? Come and carry these people. We are willing to give. So those people like that needs to be there. And that is the one that will really discourage our people. When you know that, a time will come to maybe 100 years to come, and these things you are doing at the maltreatment you are doing to people will come to know of it. People will want to do what is right always. But it is not so with slave trade and slavery. And there were men that really played an important part in this area. Those who supported the abolitionist movement. Those are people that will have featured prominently in that museum. So we cannot say that our people did not participate in it. They did. And we should tell that story. I am again saying that the two princes of Calabar, I don't know how many of us know that story. The two princes of Calabar were captured in the massacre of 1767, taken to Virginia and taken to England, regained their freedom, and came back to Calabar. So they are just a few persons who went through the Atlantic. Because wherever they went, even in the Americas, even in Britain, their basic argument was that they were not slaves, that they are not slaves, they were wrongly enslaved, that in their country, the tradition, the culture forbids that they should be enslaved. And the Europeans heard all those stories, say, okay, you were free. Go back several years, they were brought back to Calabar. And they were Christians throughout their stay in Britain. When they came to Calabar, they would have been the first people to introduce Christianity. Christianity would not have waited till 1846 for whole water to come, because these were people who had read the scripture. They used it in Britain, everything. But what happened when they came back? When they came back to Old Calabar, they were still very active slave dealers, still catching people, selling and sending them abroad. So we know about William Wilberforce, we know about Sharp, Clarkson. How many people will know about the two princes? They will have been there. Let us have a section on Africans that help the Europeans to enslave their people. And I'm saying that what we create there is universal history. Tells us nothing about the Old Calabar peculiar situation. That what we will have done is to have pictures of men like James Rogers, Thomas Jones, John Elwens, among others. Those British we know that were prominent traders in Calabar. Slave History Museum in Calabar should tell us about slave trade and slavery in Calabar, just like the one in Ghana will do for Ghana. Across the world, there are very many slave history museums. So if the Slave History Museum in Calabar cannot tell us anything about slavery and slave trading in Old Calabar, where else can we get it? We go to the Slave History Museum in Liverpool. It will not tell us anything about what happened in Calabar. They are telling us about what happened in their domain. So it will have been important for us to create these local conditions. The British abolished slave trade and slavery in 1807. And that is where the museum stopped. You say by 1807, slavery was abolished, it was over, all men were free. But we know that in Old Calabar, slave trade did not end in 1807. It continued. Even up to the 20th century, slave trade and slavery was still going on in this region. If you know about the Upper plantations, and even those that, of course, the Blood Men organization, when abolition had cut off with them, the slaves they had to use them indigenously. So there should be even a 16th section to say, even when these Europeans were no longer here, this is what our people were still doing. Like to say, okay, we got independent in 1960, and many of the crises of development in Africa today, because they say it's the Europeans, because we were colonized. But we know that we have our own rulers here. Some of them are Europeans. So it's the same thing, that if many years to come they want to create a museum of the crisis of development in Africa, we just put a white man, finish it up, and we close it. It does not tell us anything. So the Slave History Museum needs to be looked at again, because there is much, it tells us less of what we should really do. What is my conclusion? My conclusion is that those who established the museum have tried, because something has been put in place. But now that our distinguished senator is very interested in our language, culture, and history, we should not use the resources to still tell the story of the Europeans in Africa. We should tell the story of the Africans in Africa. And by so doing, we will learn better and get the appropriate lessons from history. Thank you all.
There again, we have a very beautiful, really beautiful talk. Some of these talks we should have had lengthened, because there are many ingredients that for some of us would not even have an idea. Today, it's important for us to hear. But it's simple. Three things are important. That we all suffer the attributes of inhumanity. And each time we're talking about history and slave trade, we look at the international context of slave trade only within the parameters of involvement of America and Europeans, without seeing the contributions of the black man himself. That we are all accomplices. That even the museum which is talking about, because this is clear, just trying to tell you what is arranged already. But what emerges from what he has said is just that there's a lot of limitations, a lot of inadequacy of that museum. That there must be a new story, a story told that will bring out the deep pains and penuries, or the deep inner minds of the Africans in their participation. It looked at it purely in terms of content, materials available. It looked at it also in terms of heroes that are being made of that slave trade, which is only lopsided, just only from Europeans. We are looking at other people here who had some significant impact on that trade. But what again he said is very important is that even when the slave trade formally and the legitimate trade started in 1907, there was still this slave trade travel. And no, he did not overstretch it, but I want you to would understand it two levels. That's the international trade, then the commercial trade. Commercial trade could be between one state or the other. Then there was the domestic slavery, which also continued where you have slavery. I'm sure when you refer to Akmabu, you were looking at it as a factor of domestic slavery, not in the compound of international slavery. We have looked at all these things, and all that was the appeal to is that we should try and re-embody that history, or take an interest, get back and build more material to give a true picture of what actually happened. And if we continue the way we are continuing, we'll only be telling one part of the story. And so there were great heroes like us here, those who were able to say we must continue. After all, it's our trade. And the great princes of the Epic Kingdom who were taken, those were historical artifacts or stories or things that we should take around and say, well, even though we also on our part had heroes. Well, I want to thank you, because the way you delivered the lecture was very, very wonderful. Makes us learn going simple, to the point, and direct. I'm sure that those in government, sometimes not only depending on government, but all of us, including our very distinguished Senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, once you've taken up this challenge, sir, with all respect, a man must be known by something. They may know you as senator, you will pass away, another senator will come. But when they know you as a defender of an ethnic kingdom, or a defender of the cross-river vision, or they know you as somebody who's focusing on something, I tell you, years after years, your history will be written on the sands of time. So I want to appeal to all of you that it must be both individual and government. All the time we always say government, whatever you can do to enhance, to enrich, and to create a lot more for that museum. We appeal to you to do very well. But meanwhile, before we go, we should give